What is going on, YouTube? It is your boy, Faithful to God. And tonight, we are going to go over the poor methodology regarding DNA of a particular Hebrew Israelite who I had a debate with recently. But before we get into all that, y'all, I'm going to let our special guests introduce themselves. So we have 93 and we have Nkosi. I'm going to let them, introduce themselves. And, we're going to get things started. So Fortune and Cozy, let them know a little bit about yourselves, so the audience can familiarize themselves if they haven't already. A lot of people already know you, 93. So go on ahead, man.
Right, I don't know that other guy you was referring to, but what's up? My name 93, independent researcher from city of Chicago. I basically my stance is strictly from a research perspective regarding the Hebrew Israelites' claim that African Americans and the African diaspora on a whole reflect the ancient Israelite population today. That's what I deal with primarily at the moment. And got the big cuz here in Ngozi here to speak about DNA as it relates to the relevant topic.
Yeah, peace and love. This is Brother Nkosi. The world know me as Ngozi, but it's Nkosi. And I wanted to, I'm only here to add on my understanding of DNA, presenting the information to show and prove what's what. And, I'm in full support with my cousin 93 to put in work to show and prove what we need to prove. I've been around a minute. I am the founder of Team Osiris. So this is strictly, I'm coming from the angle, strictly from a scientific perspective, without the biasness or anything, just straightforward to break down what's what and what's not. So I've been around for a minute, founder of Team Osiris, member of the Amun-Ra squad, and we will get it in and show and prove what we need to prove. So people out there, I'm sure they are aware of my character and Ngozi that's been around for a minute. So peace and love, we're here.
Yep.
That's
Repping the Masi trap.
Yeah, that's what's up. So so without further ado, I'm just gonna go ahead and kick right in and give everybody a bit of a background into what's been going on recently. So I had a debate with a Hebrew Israelite on Clubhouse by the name of Yashub, who also goes by the YouTube name Genesis49ers. We had a debate on DNA. He posits that Jacob's haplogroup is E1B1, and that E1B1 somehow gave rise, in this case, that Jacob comes from a base population that was E1B1, and that he is, I guess, theoretically the progenitor of E1B1A and E1B1B, or something to that effect. It's very strange. I don't know how he comes to that conclusion, but my position was that I believe Jacob was potentially the progenitor, the actual person. Jacob was potentially J1. That by the same criteria, Abraham was maybe J1, so on and so forth. So we had a debate on that topic. And little did I know he was recording the debate on his channel, and he was very belligerent. He was, most people on his end couldn't actually hear my arguments or my counterpoints to his points. Long story short, just very over the top. I would say very unacademic. When we were having our actual debate, it seemed like he wasn't actually addressing any of my points, and he would just throw out points that he expected me to deal with. And I think it got to the point where we were on a timer, and so I decided to take the timer off and just deal with him directly so he could actually address some of the points. And for whatever reason, he just became very belligerent. He cussed me out. He left the room. And it's unfortunate because I was hoping that we could have had a somewhat reasonable conversation where both sides could have presented their points and we could have at least cordially agreed to disagree. But it just wasn't the case. I'll say some other things happened. Certain things that I had to apologize for to a different individual. And Cozy knows what I'm talking about regarding that. Thankfully, that was squared away. And I certainly take accountability for that. And I feel that when we have these conversations, sometimes things can get heated, and it should never get that way. So I think today we're going to attempt to have a very respectful conversation where we, at the very least, try to present his position in a way where we're not trying to disparage him, because that's not what I want to try to do, regardless of how he feels about me. I fully disagree with him, but nevertheless, I feel that we can still have these conversations without having to engage in unpleasantries. So, we're going to definitely uphold our end in not engaging in that sort of behavior, despite our disagreements with him. But with that being said, what I wanted to do is I wanted to have Abu offer his thoughts on this, because he's been interacting with Yashub as well. So what I'm going to do now is, because Abu couldn't come in, I'm going to play a pre-recorded audio clip from him. So this is Abu sharing his thoughts about pretty much everything that was said. So here we go. This is Abu.
Well, first off, thanks for having me on. Good evening to everyone. When I can't stay long, by the way, so I'll try to make this quick. But when I listened to Yashub's video from last Sunday, I think it was August 29th, in which he went live on YouTube while he was in a room with you on Clubhouse, it was interesting. He seems like an interesting guy, and perhaps he's a bit too belligerent at times, uses too many F-bombs maybe. But hey, who am I to judge? That's his style. Fine, it's not my cup of tea, but it was honestly an interesting discussion, but it was hard to hear, some of this, a lot of what you were saying, Faithful, because he would talk over you. Like, even when he was muted on Clubhouse, he was still talking on the live YouTube stream. Like, you would be saying something and he would be talking over it. So it was very hard to hear a lot of what you said. And moreover, I felt like the discussion ended at a point when it was just starting to get off the ground. I feel like there was a lot more that could have been said, and hopefully you gentlemen can have more discussions, or whether it be through videos. I've been attempting to correspond with him. I've been commenting on his videos. Maybe I'll have some more interactions with him. Whatever the case, something that stood out for me from that show on the 29th, from last Sunday, was that, Yashub thought that you, Faithful, were arguing that Abraham was the progenitor of all of haplogroup J, or something like that, whether in toto or at least in the Levant. That somehow, like, Abraham brought J to the region or something like that. And I personally, I don't think I heard you say that in the show. But again, he was talking over you, so I could have missed something. But I don't think I've heard you say that in the show, in the Clubhouse discussion. Nor was I previously under the impression that was actually your position. It seems to me that Yashub inferred that from you saying that Abraham migrated into the region, in reply to him mentioning that J migrated into the region. But of course, that doesn't have to entail that Abraham alone brought J to the region. Rather, on your, and by you, I mean Faithful, on your model, we could have understood what you were saying as meaning that Abraham was part of a larger migration of people who had trickled, part of this trickling migration, larger trickling migration of people with haplogroup J who migrated into the region, and of course that could have started well before Abraham himself arrived. But anyway, Yashub polemicized against that view that, with all due respect, an apparent straw man, by stating that haplogroup J already existed during the Chalcolithic age, while Abraham lived later during the Bronze Age. Now, I wanted to point that out because I found that interesting, as it seems to undermine Yashub's own position, as, because if we date Abraham to the Bronze Age, which he did, then so too we would have to date Jacob to that time as well. Yet Yashub explicitly claimed in his video, if I can quote him, here's an exact quote. He said this 39 seconds into his video. He said, quote, "The original Israelite population would have been EP2, then later divulged into E1B1A and E1B1B," end quote. That's Yashub saying that, right? So it seems to say that Jacob is EP2. Not only is he EP2, which is E1B1, but that he's, that E1B1A and E1B1B divulged out of Jacob. That seems to be what he was saying. However, note that just as haplogroup J existed before the time frame which Yashub endorsed for Abraham, so too haplogroups E1B1A and E1B1B also existed before that time as well, right? So, I put it this way. If haplogroups E1B1A and E1B1B existed before the time of Abraham, right? Then they also had to have existed before the time of Jacob as well. And Jacob, therefore, cannot be the progenitor of those haplogroups, right? That's simple. And now bear in mind, that's not to say that Jacob can't be from haplogroup E. I've said before, and I continue to maintain that Jacob could very well have been, he very well could have had haplogroup E1B1B, but it seems to me nearly impossible for Jacob to be the Bronze Age progenitor of both E1B1A and E1B1B, right? Now, that aside, I left a comment on Yashub's video, and he later went live with a video reply to my comment, and I thanked the gentleman Yashub for that reply, and I thank him again if he's listening. Thank you, and I appreciate you taking the time to reply to me, but I'm not sure he understood my comment. Like, for example, I proposed that Noah's 3 sons all had the same haplogroup, and it's interesting, he and his fans seem to treat that as like a position that only an uninformed idiot would take, right? I think he called me a dilettante who never studies anything, right? Which is fine, that's cool. I don't mind people insulting me, but I don't think this particular position that Noah's 3 sons would have had the same haplogroup is indicative of a stupid position. I don't think that's stupid. And maybe you can discuss, you gentlemen, you and you Faithful and Ngozi can discuss that later on. But whatever the case, I had said that that haplogroup, which all 3 of Noah's sons presumably had, that it could have been J, right? That's possible, was my argument. And that it also could have been E. I said that specifically. Of course, this is on a local flood model, right? Because a local flood wouldn't require all human beings to descend patrilineally from Noah, right? Because, if it's a local flood and some people survived outside the flood zone, then Noah and his 3 sons and their descendants could, on that model, represent a subset of the overall, human picture, and therefore they would only have to capture a subset of the overall human phylogenetic tree for Y-DNA haplogroups, for paternal haplogroups, right? But I also said in that comment that if we require all human beings to descend patrilineally from Noah, then we would seem to need to push Noah and his sons back to haplogroup A, because we basically have to push them back to the beginning of the human phylogenetic tree. He didn't agree with that. And by he, I mean Yashub. Yashub's position is that, one son of Noah was A, and another son was DE, and another son had haplogroup F. And with all due respect to him, I'm not trying to disrespect him. I find him to be an interesting gentleman, but that position strikes me as highly implausible, right? It seems the least possible of all the different models being proposed. And, maybe you and Ngozi can discuss that later in the show. Whatever the case, when I wrote that comment, I was merely proposing hypothetical scenarios, right? I was proposing possibilities. I wasn't claiming that any of these models were actual, right? No, much less that he had to embrace them. But he seemed to misunderstand what I wrote, and he practically ignored what I wrote about all 3 sons possibly being E, or, on a local flood model, or all 3 sons being A on a global flood model. And he just insisted that I had simply said Noah was J, and he attacked that. And I felt like he was attacking a straw man. And interestingly, Orthodox Moore commented on his stream at the time, and shout out to Orthodox Moore, but Orthodox Moore commented trying to bring out the nuance of my actual position, and I appreciate Moore doing that, as he recognized that I was only referring to different possibilities. But Yashub, interestingly, Yashub even put Moore's comment on the screen about 18 minutes into his show, but he did that only to blow it off, right? He didn't really engage it or give it serious thought. He didn't seriously consider what was being said, and that was curious, to say the least. But those are my thoughts for now. I'm going to stop here. I know I've been rambling a lot, so and honestly, I have to run. Nonetheless, let me say I look forward to hearing the rest of the show. I'm looking forward to your comments, and I'm looking forward to hearing you and Ngozi explore this topic. All right. So to both you gentlemen, have a good evening. God bless. I got to jump on. Looking forward to the show. Thanks for having me. God bless.
All right. So that was Abu. And what I'm going to do very quickly before we get into the actual topic, I got one more thing to play. This was actually from Yashub's show. I believe this was from the 29th. And this was a clip in which he attempted to cast aspersions on J1. So he read an article, although he never showed it on his screen. And it was an article entitled Origin and Diffusion of Human Y Chromosome Haplogroup J1-M267. So I'm going to go ahead and play the clip. I'm going to show it on my screen, and you guys are going to see something in a moment.
Do you need to put a disclaimer for language?
Definitely. If anybody has sensitive ears, I would say viewers' discretion is advised. Hopefully this doesn't have any vulgarity in it, as far as I remember, but I could be wrong. But you know, if it does, then you know, might want to cover your children's ears if there are any children in the room. All right, here we go.
So we're going to read the origin and diffusion of J1M267, which is where they say the Cohen monohaplotype comes from. All right, so in this paper, it states, here we study past human male demography in West Asia with 172 high coverage whole white chromosome sequences and 889 genotype samples of haplogroup J1M267. We show that the haplogroup evolved 20,000 years ago somewhere in northwestern Iran, the Caucasus, the Armenian highland, and northern Mesopotamia. This is not the Levant. The major branch, here it goes, J1A1A1 P58 evolved during the early Holocene 9,500 years ago somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula, southern Mesopotamia. Haplogroup J1M267 expanded during the Chalcolithic, the Bronze Age, and Iron Age. So prior to this, you don't have this haplogroup here. 9,500 years ago, somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula, southern Mesopotamia. Haplogroup J1M267 expanded during the
So I want you guys to catch that. Did you notice that he was reading the paper, but when he got to the portion that says, 9,500 years ago, somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula, and then he skipped over the part where it says the Levant, and then went right to and southern Mesopotamia. So he ignored the part that said the Levant and just read, it's impossible to read that paper and not see that part. And I'm going to show you guys, because this is on my screen. This right-hand side, this doesn't actually appear in his live stream. This was added into the video so everyone could see the actual paper. He never actually showed the paper in his live stream. The left-hand side is what was in his live stream, so he doesn't actually show this paper. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So it's interesting that he did that. So here's the relevant paper, which I'm about to show. And I'm going to show you guys that it is impossible to read that paper. Even though I had it on the screen, it was on the right-hand side, but some might accuse me of photoshopping or whatever the case is. But it is impossible to actually read that paper the way that he did and to miss the relevant portion. Now, if I could find the, let me actually find that. Here we go. Hold on one second. Yeah, here we go. This was the relevant portion in the paper. You guys can see that, right? Actually, you know what? Let me do something real quick. Let me make this text a little larger, and then you guys will be able to. It is virtually impossible to read that and miss that portion. Just skip over that portion. All right, here we go. So I found this to be utterly, utterly fascinating. That he saw this and conveniently glossed over that portion where it says the Levant regarding this, this particular clade.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Next to where it says the year, they have this little mark right here. What does that mean? Does that mean less than 95, more, or about 9,500 years ago? In Gozi, if you know.
Yeah, in Cozy, yeah.
Yeah, it's less than. It's just talking about that Chalcolithic period. It's talking about less than. This is
so
just
that mark means less than when you see it.
Yeah. Also, we have to understand postulations of what's being said in a hypothetical sense. But it's less than. It's not an actual estimation, because we do know in the Bronze Age and in some layers of the earlier phases, a little bit after that Holocene glacier period that they speak of, which starts with 3 phases of that. But in between, this is why the estimation ranges between this 9,500 or possibly less than, ranging between 6,500. And I showed Faithful to God an article on that in the Chalcolithic period, when certain populations was coming in, bringing in certain alleles or variants that's responsible for certain traits that a lot of people have in those areas now.
So, Ngozi, this
Uh-huh.
sentence right here, the major branch J1A1A1P58 evolved during the early Holocene less than 9,500 years ago, somewhere in the Arabia Peninsula, the Levant, and southern Mesopotamia. It's including the Levant here. It's inclusive of the Levant.
Yes, it's include. Yes, it's a subclade of J, not the predecessor of J. The earliest form of J did develop near the Caucasus, but one of these late subclade did find a way to drift away. That happened. That's what happened with certain layers of R1b that separated from way before the Himalayas, before it separated and came through North Africa. But we'll get into that a little later. But yes.
Okay, so this specific J, not the founder, but this specific
J.
Yeah, no, it's not the founder. It's not the basal J. This is a later subclade. This is a later subclade of J. This is not the original JP209 that developed almost 40,000 years ago. This is a late subclade.
Okay, so this one did. Okay, go ahead, Faithful.
But you know what I found fascinating is that he read the article, saw where it said the Levant, and tried to be disingenuous towards his own audience. One, he didn't show it on his screen. I'm not saying this to be offensive. I'm just saying it's a bit disingenuous to read this article, see where it says Arabian Peninsula, the Levant, and southern Mesopotamia, and then read it in the Arabian Peninsula and southern Mesopotamia.
So when he was on
clearly says the Levant.
On Clubhouse, that was you showing what he was reading on the site. He never showed it because
no, that wasn't Clubhouse. No, that wasn't Clubhouse. That was his live stream, where he had recorded the Clubhouse interaction, and after he had finished, he started reading the paper.
But he read it without showing it.
He read it without showing that relevant portion. Now, you know what I found? What I found interesting was when he reads the paper, he leaves out the part that says the Levant. That to me was very telling, because there's no way you could read this paper and read it in the fashion that he did and just skip over the Levant unless you purposefully are trying to skip over the portion that says the Levant. So I thought that was very, very, very telling. But it is what it is, man. I hope that we can avoid things like this moving forward, that we don't have to engage in this sort of what I would consider cheapery, because this is a bit cheap. It's not a good thing to engage in this sort of stuff. I mean, we can be objective and honest about things, without having to do stuff like this. So I just wanted to point that out. But in Cozy, man, if I could, I did have some questions, and I think this is where you can actually show a lot of your, knowledge of, DNAs and, the migrations and everything else. One of the first questions I'm going to ask, and some of this is going to be hypothetical, if you kind of get what I'm saying. So this is going to be a little hypothetical. So, my first question is, if we are to assume, for the sake of argument, that there was a historical Noah, and again, for the audience out there, just know, the conversation that we're going to have is going to hinge on, because Yashub is making an appeal to the phylogenetic tree, and because he's attempting to make an appeal to just DNA and trying to use it to fit it within his model, whatever model he's proposing. Academia doesn't posit, and I'm sure most of you brothers and sisters know, academia in general doesn't posit this sort of the worldview that's found within the Bible. But nevertheless, for the sake of argument, just for the sake of having an academic discussion, the way that academia, the way that this is taught, like in the schools, so to speak. And again, this channel doesn't endorse any of those views, but for the sake of conversation, we want to be objective. We want to deal with this on a, I guess, like a scholarly level. And if he's going to make an appeal to any of this stuff and to propose a model, then I think we need to consider a lot of this stuff. So, in Cozy, so I'm going to say the following, in this form. If we are to assume, for the sake of argument, that there was a historical Noah who survived a flood, would you find a global flood or a local flood more plausible? Like, which one of those would be more plausible?
From a scientific perspective, it would be local. It wouldn't be global. it'll be local, and it'll be local based off those areas near the Tigris and Euphrates and Mesopotamia area. It would not be global. There has been a lot of eco changes and different things going on the planet for thousands and thousands of years. So it'll probably be more of a local flood more than a global flood that's going on. You have multiple ecosystems all through the planet alone, and you have different environmental factors and different environmental changes that's going on. So basically, as far as the global flood, I wouldn't look at it from that perspective. It would have been something local. And this is why when you go into earlier Mesopotamian stories, before you get into Noah, you have stories of floods from the Epic of Gilgamesh, all the way to something even earlier from Zusudra. His name was spelled Ziusudra, and he was a hero of the flood. And this was part of the ancient Sumerian king list. So most of these people told stories based off certain situations that was going on in their environment. A lot of these stories that we have was being told through oral tradition thousand years before it was written down. Names may change, but certain events always was happening. So for example, through time, there'll be upgrades. People would change the narrative a little bit. But floods, you really hear about these stories in those areas near Mesopotamia and around, Iraq, Iran, and even in some portions of Turkey. Even before you have Noah, you have the Epics of Gilgamesh, and before you have that, you have this Zusudra, and I want everybody to look them up, Ziusudra, and you can see a storyline of the hero on the flood. So if there was a Noah, from what we call him now, it would have been based on flood stories that exist much earlier before it was written down and on papyruses later. You get what I'm trying to say?
Right. So and this is the way that it would be. Yeah, this would be the way that it would be posited within a academic framework rather than a theological framework. Right. So I guess the next question is, if Noah's sons were historical persons, is it safe to assume they all would have had the same haplogroup? Meaning, if they have the same father, like if you have a father and he has three sons, would they all have their father's haplogroup?
Yes. So if we base things off how genetics work, of course they had the same, haplogroup. But because a lot of things is symbolic and allegorical, even for me to even, like, for example, I have a model, right? And I think that I want to say this publicly. I think that brother Yashub is an intelligent brother. He do read scientific literature, but we all differ in certain areas. So for example, if I was to create a scientific model based off my hypothetical scenario, right? Not saying this is literal, and this will be included even my modeling in pseudoism, because it's no proof. This is just an idea from a symbolic perspective. And I always say this from a symbolic perspective, from a symbolic perspective, I'll use terms like scientific Noah, right? Scientific Noah, which will be CTM168. And then from other layers, I'll bring up, the DE and earlier subsets of E for so-called Ham of hot or heat. And then Shem would be, haplogroup, E as well. And then, Joseph would be CF. But that's symbolic. That's not literal. But if you're talking about literal time, if this was a historical person, they all have the same haplogroup. They all have the same haplogroup. That model that I bring up all the time is symbolic. It's not literal. And that's me trying to fuse actual science together and create a platform to create a narrative to make it suitable. But it's still pseudo. But it's okay, because I'm not trying to make it a reality. It's symbolic to me anyway when I study the literature. But ultimately, in reality, from a scientific perspective, a standpoint, children are going to have the same paternal mark as their father, period.
Interesting. So the next question is, if we assume a scenario where Noah's sons all had the same haplogroup, right? If they were actual historical people from an actual historical father, is it possible to push the story back into human history and posit that they could have all had haplogroup A in a theoretical model? Could they theoretically have all been haplogroup A?
So again, it goes back to the layers of time. Now, if a lot of these stories was going on in the Middle East, thousands of years before it was written down, of course it'll go back to those early Homo sapiens that migrated out of Africa and separated and had sets of children. Stories may change, But here's the thing: you're talking about early humans that has left out of Africa due to due to findings like the Nubian complexes and certain tools that they found in Arabia and certain parts of Oman, and the base root of it starting in Sudan from these first people that migrated out of Africa that were successful in the human genome dealing with the phylogenetic tree. So if these stories were being told before you even have the late name Noah or Noon or even the name that I said earlier, and these people kept telling the same story over and over again. If the story was much older than what we have now, of course, it would have been from earlier way.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, there was no E 100,000 years ago. So if we're talking, go ahead.
No, I don't know. I just had some
could
you start that point over again because you had dropped out. So could you start what you were talking about, and then you had dropped out like midway through what you had said. If you could start from that very point, just a little further back, and then reiterate what you were just saying, so the audience can catch it.
I was saying, if we are talking about humans migrating out of Africa, and a lot of these stories was said through oral tradition before being written down, in a sense of, for example, in the Middle Eastern world in the late Bronze Age, they could have said Noah. Before that, we know that these people had other names. And before that, before these stories was written down, even in the Sumerian king list, the Sumerian king list is talking about certain kingdoms and certain groups of people that exist. They had dynasties that ranged between 3 exists. So not saying so what I'm saying, if you follow the Sumerian king list, you will see a timeline based off what they believe certain people lived in range from 23,000 years to 6,000 years. So what I'm saying is that if a lot of this stuff was told orally before it was written down and Noah name change, of course we do know that Homo sapiens, or humans, migrated out of Africa, and it was a successful out of Africa migration that possibly occurred between 70,000 to 100,000 years ago. We find the Nubian complexes, meaning the tools that they found in Sudan first, which they call the Nubian complexes, is stretched between the southern parts of the Levant, southern Arabia. Everybody look this up: Nubian complex, tools of the Nubian complexes, and in Oman, going back 100,000 years. But it starts in Sudan. So at this time, 100,000 years, there is no haplogroup E, there is no haplogroup J, there is nothing. So if a lot of these stories was talking about groups of people separating from a patriarchal lineage of a man orally back then, of course, the earlier specimens or the earlier narrative of the stories before being written down thousands of years later is talking about, even though haplogroups didn't exist in the mind of these people, they didn't know who the hell they haplogroups are. But I'm just saying, if we was to put a perspective to it, of course, a hypothetical scenario, of course, these earlier humans that were telling these stories through oral traditions from leaving out of Africa, talking about this lineage that they come from, of course, in an earlier phase of human history and time, they would have been A. Now, if we're talking about Bronze Age period, or we're talking about like the Natufian period, we understand that the Natufians had a high rate of E3B, and they also had CTM168. And they also had a form of E1B1, which is the predecessor of EB38 and EM215. But according to the fossils that was found in the Natufian region, there's only 5 of them. Now, if we get into the pre-Paleolithic B culture, you have a lot of haplogroup T, some CT, some H2, and some E. So bottom line is that it depends on what layer of time this stuff is being told before being written down and the narrative changed to a man named Noah. Because again, in Mesopotamia, you have flood stories that exist thousands of years before this direct flood story that we have now.
Gotcha. And if we assume a local flood in the place of the story of Noah's sons later in history, would you say that it is possible that they could have all had haplogroup CT? Would you agree that it is even possible that they could have all had haplogroup E? So too, if we posit that Noah and his sons move outward from the area of Mesopotamia, is it even possible? Is it possible for them to all have had haplogroup J? Theoretically speaking, all of these are theoretical.
I mean, theoretically, and from hypothetically, absolutely, because it depends on what layer of time we are speaking of. So yes, if we're talking about whatever layer of time, we have to follow timelines. It depends on the chronology. So if we're talking about timeline, it can go in any direction. That's why, us having personal opinions of what we believe is based off what we believe, but that doesn't fit with science. we have to understand there has been a lot of human migration, a lot of people moving around. When it comes to the Near East, again, that area gets very twisted because that's a zone of confluence. You know, you have the pre-Neolithic B culture, who were fragments of early leftover vestiges of the Natufians, who we know that was highly haplogroup E3b, CTM168, H2, and haplogroup T. That's always been abandoned. And we understand that haplogroup T is the brother to haplogroup L that splits from LT. So what I'm saying is that it can go in any direction based off whatever layer of time that you're going in. By the time you get these Hebrews in the late Bronze Age, they are not homogenous. It's not a monolith to them. They have, you know, even when you look at the Ashkenazis, you know, even though, you know, Ashkenazi, the highest paternal marker they have within the Ashkenazis is haplogroup J, but the second is haplogroup E. You know, and after haplogroup E, they have layers of haplogroup R1A1 or R1AB. Then they have haplogroup T. Even with the Sephardic Jews. So, but even when you look at the Samaritans Samaritans that live near Israel today, their Kohen marker is E3b. So what I'm saying is, by the time you get into this population in Israel, or 3,000 years ago, 3,200 years ago, let's give it even 4,000 years. We're talking about the Bronze Age. We talked about the Chalcolithic period. At this time period, the area is already highly mixed. They're highly mixed. So of course you have a strong founder effect to you have the haplogroup E there, you have the haplogroup J there, you have the haplogroup T there, you have all these haplogroups mingled in that area. So I can go in any direction, any direction.
Gotcha.
Also, and go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So, and it's also, we have to talk about something about the yes associate protein or the YAP positive marker when it comes to haplogroup D. Again, you have two perspectives about this haplogroup E thing. Some people venerate the Southwest Asian origin of EM96, development 70,000 years ago. And there's also the scientific scenario based off haplogroup EM96 developing in Northeast Africa. Now, I want to say something about this because I want to put this out there. Based off haplogroup DO that they have found, it lingers more closer to a Northeast African origin to haplogroup EM96 compared to the Southwest Asian origin. But even if it did develop in Southwest Asia, because we're talking about 70,000 years ago, these men would have still looked a lot like the Adam and Eve men that have haplogroup D, because haplogroup D, because I want to talk about this so people can get a broader understanding, because I'm not biased. Haplogroup D, you find it in Japan, but it's not the majority. You found it in Tibet, but it's not the majority. You have layers of history and layers of different populations that absorbed in it. So, for example, the Anu people and the Jamin people that actually had haplogroup D at the highest percentage are leftover vestiges from older populations, but they are still slightly mixed with the Austronesian population. And their mitochondrial DNA and autosomal DNA is very far distinct from the subclades of haplogroup D M174 that you found amongst the Adam and Eve men who still mingle with their original indigenous haplogroup M2, M3, M4, M5. So what I'm saying is that if we look at them as an example, even possibly developing in Southwest Asia 70,000 years ago in early green tropical Arabia, these men, which will be labeled as basal Eurasians because they branch off the base of early Eurasians that split, and then at root basal Eurasians have a split in ancient North Africa, which is haplogroup CTM168, which is the brother branch of BT. And a lot of these early North Africans, before they have these later additions inserted into them, were very close to Hadza, Hadza man, which is haplogroup BM60, which is a later stratum of that BT M168. I'm sorry, BT, which is a brother branch to CTM168, would have been very close to these people. So what I'm saying is that, but based off haplogroup DO that they found recently, and it's found in Nigeria, and they turned around and found it again in 2020 when they found the basal branch of it with this Syrian man, but then they turned around and found the family tree, then they turned around and found it amongst the African-American man. They placed it back in Africa as an African origin, not throwing out the Southwest Asian origin possibly, but it's still leaning more closer to Africa, North Africa, not sub-Saharan African origin of early EM96, which did distinct from them earlier Tyrian cultures. If we follow, A, B, T, C, T, M168, and then DE, and then after DE, you see some layers staying in Africa and some layers migrating out later on. This is why when you go to the Natufians, you find these Natufian men with clades of E1B1 and later clades of EZ827 of E1B1B, and you also found them with CTM168. Go ahead. I just want to put that out there.
Absolutely, absolutely, man. So my next question is regarding the idea of one son of Noah having haplogroup A, while another son of Noah having haplogroup DE. Would you say that it is possible? Do you think that is possible too? Like, if we're talking about literal historical figures here, if you have a man who has a son and his son is A, is it possible for the same man to have another son who is DE?
Well, I follow the phylogenetic tree. I wouldn't say nothing like that, because haplogroup A is a predecessor or a predecessor that exists before haplogroup CT. CT, if I'm following the straight to the point, the phylogenetic tree, the timeline, following the markers, it's impossible for A to be a son of CT. That doesn't fall in line with the model of science. So A, you have different layers of A. You have different subclades, the terminal snips of A before you even get to BT and CT. It's impossible for CT to give rise to an A. That's why in my model of the chart, symbolically speaking, I wouldn't put A after CT. I couldn't do that.
I got a question.
Scientifically.
I got a question, and this is relevant because I had dropped off. So I heard the brother in his video mention the possibility of haplogroups changing through something called rapid radiation. What is that? How does it work? How often does it happen? Is it documented happening? And how long does that take? Does it just take one person changing haplogroups, or does it has to take a certain amount of time for that scenario?
Well, adaptive radiation, it depends on what's going on. If there's a strong population boom, it depends on what's going on at the levels of founder effects. Subclades or terminal snips or subclades, it doesn't make, to me, this is where we differ at in certain things. It doesn't make sense to me for markers to just mutate that quick randomly, even if you have a strong population boom of these men reproducing with thousands and thousands of women. Phone, I don't even know why I was being distracted. So anyway, so even if you have adaptive radiation and different environmental factors or whatever, it for me it wouldn't make sense that it happens that quick to create these subclades so fast. You get a perfect example is looking at R1BM269 that a lot of white boys have, but not even just white boys, but since the Yemenite, since these dudes been
shout out to the white boys.
I'm just saying, but these men these Europeans have been reproducing with all types of people, colonizing Native Americans, raping African women, colonizing most of America, and most of America today is R1BM269. And it's been the same marker since they drifted out, since the Yemenite. So we're talking about 4,000 years ago, 4,500 years ago. It's still R1B. There is no late subclades coming out of layers that even develop independently in the Americas. So that's why, for me, looking at it scientifically, I don't see it happening that fast. Even with a lot of the stratums of E that you find. Now, in some cases, you have certain traits of E's that's hanging on cuffs that's already on the verge of changing its position, because E is so old. E is not new at all. E is very old. E is older than R. So when you look at these E's, like you go from E1B1 or EP2, and then it takes time, and you have other layers that's merging into, even before that, you got EP177, then you get EP2. There's a lot of things going on with E, because E has been around for so long before it splits and goes into these multiple directions. I do know that the people in sub-Saharan Africa, South, have late downstream mutations or later splits, because a lot of these E's or these earlier clades were already in the early Green Sahara, thousands of years. It was already in North Africa. That's why I pump a North African origin of haplogroup E, because it makes more sense, especially with the findings of Iberian Marusians, especially with the finding of at the base root of the Natufians. You find 6.8% Amadic that they're saying now, at 6.8% to 23% North African, and 64% Bedouin Arab, which is not modern Arab, but the Bedouin type Arab, which links to the Basal Eurasians and Socotra Island in Yemen. So what I'm saying is that E is so old, it makes sense that it have that much diversity. But far as like happening so quick, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't vouch for that. But based off certain environmental pressures and certain environmental factors, certain things could happen in certain faster paces in certain areas compared to other areas, but it depends on what's going on. But
So
as fast as like 300 years, 400 years, I wouldn't vouch for that. I wouldn't say that no, not at all.
So to clarify, we not shouting out the white boys and girls you said went out there and raped and did wrong. We just not being offensive to anybody based on their race. That's historical what he said, but we ain't shouting them fools out. So to be clear, when we talk about adaptive radiation and rapid radiation, for him to make that case as a hypothetical, he couldn't even go that strong on that point because he would have to actually demonstrate that happening during that epoch of history.
Yeah, for anybody. That's what me, like when I got on their show, we differ in that. And it's okay for him, because you do have some scientists that write papers on this that try to say it, but it don't lean in their favor. But you do have scientists that try to write about it, but it doesn't lean in their favor based on certain samples and examples. It takes
a certain time period faster. Like, okay, so
yeah. So example, let me just say this, King. You do have scientists out here that's creationists. To get in the field of science, you don't have to be an atheist. You have creationist scientists. You have scientists that already speaks out publicly as creationists, but understand scientific methodology. But because there are gaps in science, they can insert whatever they feel they want to insert in it. So you can talk to scientific methodology, but you have to be able to show and prove what you need. So what I'm saying is that because you have a few scientists that write on that, it doesn't always lean in the favor of the general consensus, because in the consensus, it's not going to say that, even though you can still have a hypothetical model. You get what I'm trying to say?
So what
I'm saying is, because you do have scientists out there, people that's creationists, that have degrees in biology, that's doctors in it. Because there are gaps in it, they have room it can be messy in those messy areas where they can insert their own personal ideas in it.
So to close the book
real quick.
Now I just want to say this one thing, Faithful. To fully address the theory on adaptive radiation, because you have E1, B1 being a progenitor, you got CT. CT will make the DE, will make the E downstream. Yes. E1 will make E1, B1, B, and A. So that's his thing. But that's just a possibility. It's a hypothetical. What needs to be shown is a paper showing an environmental shift that actually caused a sample size that did actually downstream into those particular haplogroups in the Levant. Other than that, you just have a possibility, you have a hypothetical, and it does take time. It does not happen with
does take time because we have to understand. Haplogroup EM96 is literally 70,000 years old. It took a long time before you get the closest brother branch to EM96 or the early E1B1A is E1A, which is EM33 that the Dogon people have and other hunter-gatherers in East Africa and the Dogon in West Africa, which has the EM33, right? And even some Fulani got EM33. Before you get into the EP177, thousand years before it forms in the EP177, and then from EP177, you get the EP2, or EP2, which is E1B1, which exists 47,000 years ago, before you even have the early branch of E1B1A in the form of EB38 42,000 years ago. You get what I'm saying? So it's a lot going on. Now, if you look at the gap between E1B1 at 47,000 years, and then you find E1B1A, this subclade or downstream mutation merging between 6,000, it doesn't take that much time for subclade mutations to happen. I mean, it's not that long for a subclade or a terminal SNP to form compared to a whole different haplogroup. Listen to what I'm saying again. You have EM96 70,000 years ago. From EM96, you got other layers happening into EP177. Then you get this EP2, which is E1B1, the same one that they found over there in the Levant, which was the predecessor of E1B1A and E1B1A2, right? That's 47,000 years. Before you have these later downstream subclades between 47,000 years in this EB38 and EM215, slightly ranging between 38,000 years to 42,000 years ago. There's a 5.6 thousand year range of this subclade mutation and functioning. So for a subclade, like I always said, it doesn't take a long, that makes sense for a 6,000 year range or 5,000 something year range for a subclade to form compared to a whole nother haplogroup ranging between 3,000 years. You get what I'm trying to say? With the subclades or terminal SNPs could mutate faster because it's still in that layer of that phylogenetic tree family compared to becoming something totally different, going from, A to B that fast. You get what I'm trying to say?
Right. Now, and Cozy, real quick, I got to say this. So is it impossible to posit the idea that a single man gave rise to 12 sons and that half of them were E1B1A and the other half were E1B1B? Now, I'm not saying this is necessarily this gentleman's position, Yashub's position, but I'm saying, is it impossible for a single man to have 12 sons and for them to immediately have completely different haplogroups between the half of them? So 6 of them have E1B1A and the other 6 have E1B1B. Is first and foremost, is that impossible?
From a scientific perspective, no. Yes, that's impossible, because think about it. If I had 12 kids right now and I have children, all my sons got E1B1A. So what I'm saying is that there would be no, I'm just speaking literal. Let's look at people right now. You have men out there with 12 and 14 kids. You have sperm donors out there. Matter of fact, I was talking to How Music. There's a Jewish guy who was giving his sperm to a lot of women. And he has over, I think, 100 children. All these children had the same paternal marker. So what I'm saying is, I mean, the ones that was boys. So what I'm saying is that from a realistic perspective, he's a secular Jew. I forgot the guy named How Music. I hope he called in. He remembered the guy we was talking about. This dude is literally, he's a sperm donor. He have a whole lot of children.
Oh, you dropped out.
Got over 100 children. So what I'm saying is that if you got a man out here with 12 children, from a real perspective, they all gonna have the same haplogroup. They all gonna have the same haplogroup. So if I had 14 kids right now, 14 sons, they all gonna have my paternal marker. EP252, aka E1B1A7A. All of them. And if they don't, and they go from a whole nother alphabet, I'm just saying from the nomenclatures that they use, that ain't my kids. Even though when it comes to, paternity tests trying to find out parents, they're looking at another layer of DNA, not just single haplogroup to determine children. So let's get that straight too, because if a man has a daughter, and he take a paternity test, they're looking at other things, not just haplogroup. But I'm just saying, if you got a child with a whole other, you get what I'm saying?
Nah, I got you. Now, how about this? Since he posits a Bronze Age beginning point for Abraham, did E1B1 exist before the time of Abraham? Meaning, do you find it existing well before the time of Abraham? Correct?
Yeah. E1B1 was E1B1 was around for thousands and thousands. It was in the Middle East. It was in North Africa. It was around for thousands and thousands of years. Absolutely.
Right. Now here's the thing. Did E1B1A and E1B1B exist before the Bronze Age period?
Absolutely.
So if a person says Jacob was E1B1 and that through him, he gave rise to E1B1A and E1B1B, would you say that for whoever, it doesn't matter who it is, anybody that posits that view, would you say that particular viewpoint would be considered pseudo in accordance with academia? In a Bronze Age period. So in other words, during the Bronze Age, to say, so you understand, if a person says that a man during the Bronze Age who was E1B1B was the progenitor of E1B1A and E1B1B, would you say that sort of viewpoint would be considered pseudo?
I mean, of course,
to say that a single man who is E1B1B gave rise to A and B. That he gave rise to A and B. Would that be considered pseudo?
That model, that women E1B1 exists before the Bronze Age, way before the Bronze Age. E1B1A exists way before the Bronze Age. So yes, of course, that wouldn't be that would be labeled as pseudo, because E1B1A and E1B1B exist way before the Bronze Age. You got to remember, and the Tufians exist before the Bronze Age. The mark was already lingering around then. You get what I'm saying?
Interesting. So I guess now we can kind of get into some of the nitty gritty in terms of the people of Israel during the Bronze Age period, moving forward, late Bronze Age, whatever, whenever a person, wherever they want to introduce the people of Israel. Let's say, late Bronze Age, after, whatever the case, would you say that the people of Israel were homogenous, or were they a hodgepodge of different things according to academia?
They was a hodgepodge. They wasn't homogenous. In the middle, in the Bronze Age, we're talking about when J completely dominates in the area. There's a bottleneck on E. even though I believe the E was extremely strong in the southern parts of the Levant. But there's a bottleneck in certain layers. Haplogroup T was over there. We have to give credit to Haplogroup T. Haplogroup T was over there for thousands of years. And something, to be honest with you, in the eastern part of Levant, Haplogroup T was over there before the Cambrians even leaked out of North Africa and hit the so-called Levant and mingled with the Amerindian groups before they become this population called the Tufians. And this is before the Bronze Age. So you got haplogroup T. You even find a haplogroup T and H2 and E lingering around the pre-potty Neolithic B culture. So by the time you get into the Bronze Age, you have more people coming from Iran, more people coming from the Caucasus, more people coming from different areas of the world. Even shit, and the Philistines, according to records, come from the Crete area. You know, based off certain markers that they talked amongst the southern, the early Philistines. And you could type this up. Ancient Philistines come from Crete. This area was already mixed up. So you're talking about, and the Philistines were actually the sea people. So we're talking about in the Bronze Age, they're all mixed up. They're all mixed up. Now, does that take away haplogroup E? Because me, you know, I root for Africa. And my whole thing is, and I'm not biased, because I'm not even with me rooting for Africa, I don't denounce, you know, ideas that could possibly be true. I already said, you know, haplogroup E in some layers, they might find out that it developed in Southwest Asia 70,000 years ago, but based off haplogroup DO, it's not looking like that. And it makes sense based off what's being found and presented that it developed in North Africa from the Tyrian culture, Tyrian group. But if it didn't, so what? So what I'm saying is, and this is how science works. So what I'm saying is that at this time period, you already have, when it comes to the even before the biblical narrative, you know, it would be wrong to say that people with certain subclades of haplogroup E1B1 or E1B1B or certain clades of E wasn't there, because they were there helping write a lot of this stuff from the southern Levantine route. And also at this time, you have J's already taken over in the Bronze Age. So what's going on is that in the Bronze Age, it's a mixed multitude. They already mixed up. They already different groups of people. The mitochondrial DNA is distinct. They're mingling with more and more immigrants. More and more people are getting absorbed in newer populations. So at this time period, you have, as a good blueprint, you have a little Latin America already going on over there at a larger rate. Different groups of people mixed up. And I'm just using Latin America as a good example, because in Latin America, they're racially ambiguous. They can go in any direction. You can find brothers and sisters as dark as space. You can find brothers and sisters as light skin. It's not a color thing or a racist thing. This is just a human thing. And to be human, mixing is what humans do, especially in an area like the Middle East, which is a zone of confluence that's in between North Africa, Southern Europe, and the Near East, and Southwest Asia. Look at the direction that it's in. It makes sense.
Right. If I could do something real quick, I'm going to share my screen because I want to kind of share some of this with you. So from the biblical text, because the model that's being proposed by the opposing side would posit the biblical text in some capacity, right? So if a person says that, okay, I think he dropped out. Let's see if he comes back.
Go ahead, Shadow.
Yeah. Shout out to Abu. Oh man, I wanted to show him something from the phylogenetic tree, so I'll wait for him to come back and then I'll read something, because the model that's being proposed posits that Ham is A, right? That Shem is DE, and that what was I believe Japheth was F, if I'm not mistaken, or was it CF? I could be mistaken. There he goes. All right, so Nkosi.
Signal drop. Yes, sir, brother.
So theoretically speaking, from the proposed model from the opposing viewpoint posits, you know, and of course they're attempting to also use the biblical text to try to harmonize this in some capacity. A is proposed to be the biblical progenitor Ham, the actual person Ham, right? So they're believed to have the A haplogroup. Then you have Shem purportedly being DE. Now, all things considered, right? Look at this. I'm going to show you something from the biblical text. I'm going to pull it up on my screen. And if we're going to take this for what it is, right? If a person is going to take this at face value as a hyper literal thing, that these were literal people, I want you to tell us if you think that this is impossible from the standpoint of literal progenitor. Here we go. So this is Genesis 9, and we're going to look at this right here. Verse 24 says, when Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him. Now, who was his youngest son according to this narrative? The youngest son was Ham. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, right?
Mhm.
Now, according to the model that's being proposed by this gentleman, A is Ham, but DE is Shem. Now, if Ham, according to the biblical text, is believed to be the youngest son, is it impossible for Ham to be A and Shem to be DE? Is that impossible?
Of course, that's impossible. Of course, no. If Ham is younger and he's haplogroup A, and A comes before DE, that doesn't make sense. That wouldn't make scientific sense. That's not what the phylogenetic tree says. Put up the phylogenetic tree. Put up the paternal phylogenetic tree and show what it says.
We're gonna do it right now.
It doesn't show. It just how could
right now?
No scientist, no geneticist will say that A comes out the D. That doesn't make sense scientifically.
Right.
I mean, again, that's personal models. And again,
let me make this larger.
I mean, when it comes to this is real. But everybody has, postulations of what they feel, but we have to stay close to what science is saying. Look at it right there. It's right there. It's A, it's A, it's A. You look at that. You got A,
right
you got
there.
A1B, you got BT, CT, you got D.
Can you hear him?
Yeah, could you see?
Is that too small for y'all? Is that too small for y'all?
Yeah, we can see it. It's right there. Look how far D is from A. I mean, look how far that is. How could a son be A and then the dad be D, or an older brother be D and a little brother is A? No, bro. It don't make sense. I mean, look at it. Look at the phylogenetic tree. And then even if you try to say ain't no BT, which no, I never seen no analysis on that. It don't make sense. Like you cannot say that A exists even if you put CT there. Without the B, we know the brother branch of BM60 is there. So to denounce BT doesn't even make sense. But what I'm saying is that if you try to say that CT, because BM60 exists amongst the Hadza people. But what I'm saying is that even if you put CT, you still can't put D before A. No. Look up, no matter of fact, type up a 2021. What's this? 2021 up to date. Type up a 2021 up to date phylogenetic tree. We don't want to deal with just what we feel and what we believe hypothetically. Right. We want to deal with real science and what the geneticists are saying. Right. I'm not going to be biased, to try to promote what I want people to feel. No, I'm going to try to stick to whatever I believe and keep it at the pattern of what scientists are saying. I mean, no, bro, like if you use that model, you can't say that A is younger than D. Right. No.
Something else too, regarding the Natufians, it seems that they had a lot of admixture with the Anatolian farmers and the Basal European. The Basal Europeans were the Anatolian farmers, correct? There was a lot of admixture between them and those groups, right?
They were mixed
on the maternal side, right?
They were mixed with Basal Eurasians. They mitochondrial DNA was completely Basal Eurasian. They wasn't just E. They was also haplogroup CT. And again, when they only found 5 of these Natufian fossils. Let's make that clear. They didn't excavate the whole area. And they were clades of E1B1B, 2 of them. One was E1B1, which is the predecessor of EB38 and EM215, or E1B1A and E1B1B. That was the predecessor of that. And then they also
CT.
And they also found 2 of them with CTM168. So there you go.
So let me ask you a question. According to the logic of the brother with the rapid radiation, if they rapidly radiate, is it possible for them to rapid radiate in his model, not in according to science or truth? In his model, couldn't they just rapidly radiate to J or R1B or any of those things?
If we follow his model, and I'm not saying that whatever his model is, he feels is wrong, but if we follow his model, rapid radiation can happen with any group of men in a population boom. It doesn't matter what marker it is. So it can happen with J, it can happen with E, it can happen with T. I'm just saying,
So I'm saying his argument includes an argument where they could have rapidly radiated as far as R and J, or is that far-fetched on my end?
If we use his model, rapid radiation is rapid radiation. Adaptive radiation is adaptive radiation, regardless of any group of men, whatever paternal marker you want to use. So, you know, to say it just happened with E, it could have happened with J, it could have happened with anybody, hypothetically speaking. You get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I know. I'm saying because 2J could that, according to his model, or no?
If Jay was doing what, according to his model, if we follow that model, which he knows that me and him differs in that area, but if we follow that model, if Jay was in the area doing what he say it was doing based off his model, yes, it'll happen rapidly with Jay, and it'll be multiple.
Yeah. I'm just playing his game because he's saying that because it's, you know, CT give rise to everybody outside of Africa, correct?
Yes, everybody outside of Africa, and also CT. Again, that model based on haplogroup DO from recent studies, CT gave rise to DE, and DE gave rise to E in Africa, while other layers leaked out of Africa. I don't denounce E coming out of Africa. Not saying that it didn't, but based off the DO finding, I'm sticking to North Africa. That's what I'm saying.
And CT was in that same region with E1B1B and and what was the other one? And E1B1. In the Natufian settlement.
Right, and it was also in the pre-pottery Neolithic B culture. You find CT, you find E1B1B, you find an early branch of EM96, and you also find H2, and you also find T amongst them. This is how you know that, I'm sure if they dig more, it's not going to look the way people want it to look. This is an area that has been mingling for thousands of years. Those cavemen dudes that left out of North Africa went into the Near East, meeting up with people that was already there. And if we follow the out of Africa model, human beings been out of Africa for 100,000 years. The successful out of Africa migration. People don't stop moving around because, you know, after they left, other people start leaving out. And some people start back migrating because there was a back migration in Africa.
That's right, man. Yeah, according to academia, the way it's posited. Oh, I really got to ask this question in Cozy. So, if a person is going to make these sort of appeals using this sort of model, is it impossible from a phylogenetic tree perspective? Is it impossible to posit the idea of just, what is it, micro, not macro evolution, if one is going to make the argument for these things? So in other words, can a person ignore the Cro-Magnon DNA that's found that was responsible for certain mutations and certain things within, you know, certain populations? Can a person ignore that at all? Is you know, holding to the viewpoint of a phylogenetic tree model?
Well, Cro-Magnon men were Homo sapiens. They were us, the people that you found in Europe. Those early Cro-Magnon from the late Pleistocene to the Mesolithic European hunter-gatherers. Those are all darker skinned Homo sapiens sapiens. They were the same species as us. And a lot of those paternal markers, I think some of those men were CV20. Some of those men, they even found a branch of BT up there. People don't remember that. They found BT up there. I think that was 40,000 years ago. I have to find that article. They also found, this is early Europe, but you know, they only called these people Cro-Magnon men because they found the art in the Cro-Magnon caves in France. You also find 4,700 years ago, when he even brought this out, Yashub, you found branches of E1B1A in Europe and France 4,000 years ago. You find branches of E1B1A traveling with EV13 in Corsica. He know about this, and this is what lets us know, and this is what even leans more close.
They also found A. They found A in Europe, right?
Yes, there was a branch of A that was up there, a branch of A1A1 that was up there near Sweden. You can find it up there as well. But what I'm saying is that that E going all the way up there, which really lingers closer to a North African model over a West Asian model. My whole thing again is showing
my little brothers made it to Sweden.
My whole thing again is showing an African presence, not saying that Africans just wasn't staying in huts in tropical sub-Saharan Africa. Because again, even in sub-Saharan Africa, those humans down there that was south of the Sahara 8,000 years ago was absent of haplogroup E. A lot of these men were already in North Africa. You can see it in the Sicily cave art, the Pheasant cave art. Before you have Ouagadougou, before you have, you know, these empires that people create, you find these men in early North Africa when it was green, before the Holocene glacier period. So what I'm saying is that when you look at these early cave art, the Ibero-Marusians, the Kefians, it clearly shows this. So it's when it comes to the Cro-Magnon people, which was Homo sapiens sapiens, and they only call them Cro-Magnon people from the Cro-Magnon cave art in Europe. A lot of these men with HIJK before the splitting from early basal Eurasians that was going up there. A lot of these people with CB20 like Kostiki man and Lebrana man. Villebrana man was R1b, the predecessor of R1b VA8 that back migrated into Africa 7,000 years ago. Villebrana man exists 13,000 years ago. He was dark skinned with blue eyes. Look up Villebrana man. Their mitochondrial DNAs was a bunch of U's like U5, U2, U3. You even had some N up there. You had Cheddar man was a clade of haplogroup I. He wasn't white at all, and we know that I and J split from one another. So what I'm saying is that look at what's going on. So these old late Pleistocene Cro-Magnon humans from late Pleistocene to Mesolithic were all groups of people that migrated out of Africa, went through the Middle East, and ended up in Europe from other later layers of people that kept coming in. The Amerindian groups and the Neolithic farmers that expanded from Anatolia. You know, they started to expand from Anatolia around 8,000 years ago before they hit Crete and started to wipe out those early Mesolithic Europeans that died out or got absorbed in the newer populations. Before the Bronze Age or the late Bronze Age or the Iron, primarily the Bronze Age, when those Yemenite start to come in, you know, taking over the Neolithic farmers that came in prior before them. So even Europeans are not a monolith, or they're not even homogenous when you look at what's going on with them. They represent a combined situation as well, a fusion situation as well.
Right. Can I say this? Just in the same way that a person could potentially make a case for E1B1B, you know, being somehow, you know, a possible haplogroup that could have been found theoretically speaking in Jacob. Can a person also posit J1 just as much? You know, in other words, can both of those actually be? Can a case be made for both, albeit a rigid case? Because I imagine that this is going to be in either direction. No matter how a person tries to do it, it's going to be difficult.
It can go in any direction. See, based off me holding on and understanding the Tufians, I stick to my model. But again, if we deal with the Hermetic race theory or the Hermetic race theory, they're not saying that Ham is black. They're saying that Ham comes from some brown-skinned Iranians that conquered Egypt and brought advanced civilization. These are brown-skinned Caucasoids. And these are all haplogroup J carriers. They're talking about Iranian people going from, and I don't believe in that, but I'm just saying, this is why Ashkenazis in some cases can argue like that. Because because if you follow that model, you're talking about advanced Caucasians coming from Iran, haplogroup J carriers, going into different directions, and bringing advanced civilization, just not as Shem, but also as Ham and also as Joseph. You get what I'm saying? So they can argue that point. But if we follow to the area of understanding the multicultural layers of the Middle East, it wouldn't make sense. But if you wanted to follow that model, it could make sense, hypothetically speaking, to people that follow that model. That's why, you know, I leave room for everything, whether I agree with it or not. And in science, this is a null hypothesis. And as a null hypothesis, I'm going to doubt myself before I open up my mouth. This is why I always say symbolically, possibly, because there's not a complete full drawn conclusion. And for anybody to do that is egotistic. Anybody. You get what I'm saying?
Right. And also, could it be possible that from an A model, like if we were to posit that all the sons were A, could it be the case, right? That
well, let's look up,
given the way that
if you got a chance right now, if you look up the Jews of Yemen and look up their paternal markers, based off that, you can't throw out the window that A wasn't there. I mean, especially when we know in 700 BC, first of all, for example, E1B1A is not denounced because we understand that as a base population, the Yoruba was used 3,000 years ago as a sample that shows the African component and even modern Ashkenazis that mixed 3,000 years ago. And there was an article on that. But let's talk about this. 700 BC, and I'm not talking about the Yoruba culture because the Yoruba culturally, that's recent. The name is recent. We're talking about their genetics. Their genetics predate their culture. And a lot of those genetics was even found in Ibero-Maurutians at 35%. But then they turned around and said that component actually existed in North Africa before it was inserted south through the Kefian branches of Ibero-Maurutians that inserted amongst them at 12.5%. So let's make sense out of this. So if we look at the Nubians, Tahakra, who's talked about in the Bible, who saved the Israelites from the Syrians, and then you go in that area that starts with a D, something Oasis, where they measured the skulls and they said the skulls fit Africans, right? And it makes sense that we do know that a lot of these Sudanese men who were coming out of Sudan and to the period in the 25th dynasty had haplogroup A. So what I'm saying is that now when you look at these Jews in Yemen, look at their paternal markers. Matter of fact, you can go to Wiki if you want to, but even Wiki leads to the citation in the articles. If you press the number on the side, it leads to the citations. And it clearly said that these men, some of these men got haplogroup A. And it also said they got E3B. And it also said they got J. And you get what I'm saying? So I wouldn't throw A out the window, even though I don't follow that for my model, but I wouldn't throw A out the window because to me, symbolically speaking, A and B is Adamites, symbolically speaking. That's not literal for me.
Got you. But theoretically speaking, just, hypotheticals here, if we're just going to go with hypotheticals, if indeed there were 3 men, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and they happen to be A, theoretically speaking, could it be the case that you could get the spectrum of diversity that we have in, from the phylogenetic tree in those regions? But would it be the case that, could it be the case that you could get a theoretical haplogroup, so you could get a haplogroup haplogroup J that is both Semitic and Hamitic, and also get a haplogroup, E that's also Hamitic and Semitic. Is it possible that you can get both?
I mean, of course, think about it. Let's look at the people in Ethiopia. And Somalis. Somali people, linguistically speaking, are Cushitic. But some of these brothers got haplogroup T, and a lot of these brothers got E3B. Or let's look at some of the Bantus. Believe it or not, if you go into Rwanda, some of the Bantus got, and Bantu is a branch of Benue Congo, which is a late stratum of Niger Congo. But some of the Bantus had R1B. And we do know that R1B was in the Green Sahara 7,000 years ago. So it makes sense that some of these Bantu speakers, like look at the Hutu of Rwanda, they have branches of R1B, the same R1B that you find in Cameroon, and the same R1B that you find amongst the Haza. So what I'm saying is that you can have a J, you got J in Egypt. They don't speak a Semitic language in Egypt. The most purest language close to, well, they speak Arabic, which is Semitic, but you have Coptics, linguistically speaking. It's not part of the Semitic branch of Afro-Asiatic. Coptic is a derivative of a later phase of ancient Egypt, especially in the writing script. These dudes got haplogroup J, they got haplogroup B, and they have haplogroup E, and they also have haplogroup, they got J, E, and R. They have J, E, R, and B. Look it up. So you can have people that's mixed up and they speak different languages. You get what I'm saying? Parts of different language families. So you could have a Semitic speaker who could be haplogroup A, because you have Arab men with haplogroup A, and you have Arab speaking men with haplogroup A. So what I'm saying, this is why it's problematic to try to use the biblical narrative to identify people with genetics. That's where it gets fragmented, because it's starting not to make sense, because now you're starting to see these men with these old archaic markers speaking languages amongst other groups of people, because people are all mixed up. You get what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. Yep, man. In the chat, you shout out to Reggie. He's mentioning the Yemenite Jews, or the Yemenite people. And that's actually what in Cozy, that's what you generally believe if one were to go with because we know that the Israelites weren't necessarily homogenous even in their looks. You had all different kinds of looking Israelites, but you believe that many of them look like the Yemeni Jews, Iraqi.
Yes. Yeah. The original
They
Israelites,
were like a swarthy.
Hold on, let him tell you. He's gonna tell you his opinion on the Yemenites, because we know this. He said this years ago.
Yeah, the closest population that looks like the Israelites, they look like the Yemeni Jews. They look like the people of Yemen. They look like some of the Habasha. They look like the Jews of Iraq and Iran. Just because the population look like something today don't mean it always looked like that. I can even go as far to say that early EV38 or early E1B1A, that was in early North Africa before it went south of the Sahara and mixed with ghost population and early Eastern hunter-gatherers, didn't have the same morphology that developed later on as they mingled. You get what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is that when it comes to what an Israelite looked like, they would have looked like the Jews of Yemen. They would have looked like the Jews of Yemen. And that's just without contradiction of doubt.
Right. Now here's the thing. Now I'm gonna bring out something a little controversial. So for the Hebrew Israelite community, so E1B1A is E1B1A the haplogroup of the Israelites?
I was just gonna ask him that. Let me preference. African Americans have that. Go ahead.
So E1B1A, E1B1A and E1B1B, as I was trying to bring up to you earlier, you find E1B1A, like for example, in Ramesses III, you find E1B1A in the early Green Sahara north before you find it south. A lot of the now here's the thing, E1B1A was already in West Africa, but some E1B1As was also outside of Africa. This is before the Israelites even happened. So by the time you get Israelites, again, the Israelites, you have a higher late, you have E1B1B amongst them. You have even amongst them, in one article, they tried to say in one article, but I got to get reference on that 6% of the sum of the Natufian sum was found to be EB38 or E1B1A. But I have to look deeper into that to see what it is. But here's the thing. We do know that E1B1A was in the BMAC culture. We do know that E1B1A was in Corsica. We do know that E1B1A was in some portions of France. We do know that E1B1A in the form of E1B1C, not the EM2 mutation, was in the multiboy that was found in Ethiopia. We do know, based off the people in the early Green Sahara, you found stratums, and this would be, stratums, or what they believe that E1B1A was in certain parts of the Sahara as early as 11,000 years ago. We do know that, according to Stickcell, certain variants of EB38 travel from east to west, according to Stickcell, and developed in the wet phase of the Sahara, which helps us. The Stickcell trait helped. Stickcell alone helped a lot of Africans fight off malaria before they went inserted south. And this is even way before the Bantu expansion. So what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to the question that some Israelites have, we do know that E was there. Basically, we know that E1B1B was there. I know an Ashkenazi Jew named Steve who was found to be E1B1A. Also, we do know that 3,000 years ago, they did find in some components in what they use in Jews that they do show a mixture that was Yoruba-like in signature, which shows an ancient African component, which could have happened before 3,000 years, but before this fusion 3,000 years ago. And based off that, it kind of goes back to that what they found amongst these Ibero-Maurutians that exist 15,000 years ago that had Haza and Yoruba-like genetic components before going into the Levant as the Cambrians and becoming the Natufians, bringing those stratums there. And later on, as they get absorbed in the Bronze Age, you find this fusion 3,000 years ago with these people already carrying some of these components amongst them. We do find it there. So here's the thing. When it comes to E1B1A, E1B1A has phases or layers of history that exist way before you find certain stratums of it in sub-Saharan Africa, even though it was already in sub-Saharan Africa. So we have to understand there are subclades to E1B1A.
Let me clarify it this way. Let me clarify it this way, so you can see what I'm kind of saying. Not that you can find it within these populations, but rather the theory that most Hebrew Israelites try to posit is the idea that West Asia was E1B1A dominant, and that these people somehow migrated into Africa in 70 AD, and then they populated. That West and Central Africa were like unpopulated until these people came after 70 AD and that kind of stuff.
No, I don't know. That's why Westwood that doesn't. Again, that's why I differ with a lot of these people. I would never say nothing like that. E1B1A was already in the north of the Sahara for thousands of years, even though some left out of the Sahara and went to multiple places, because people do not stay confined in one spot. But no, these people already were intermingled. You can't say that every Yoruba, which is 90% E1B1A, is something from the Middle East. You can't say that every Mandinka. These people are not Hebrews. They already had these customs. E1B1A was already spread out in multiple areas. You get what I'm trying to say? Ramesses III had E1B1A. You find it in all types of areas before you find it in one area. So what I'm saying is, to answer your question, did some Jews have some E1B1A? I'm sure they did. Did a lot of them have E1B1B? Absolutely. Did a lot of them have J? Absolutely. Did a lot of them have T? Absolutely. Did a lot of them have H2? Absolutely. It wasn't homogeneous.
Got you.
So let me ask him a question. Let me ask him a question. On the whole, African Americans who majority have E1B1A, genetically, according to genetics that would you say that they are the descendants of the Jews primarily?
African Americans are descendants of West and Central Africa. Those markers exist in Africa before even the Israelites even came back into Africa.
That sounds like a no.
Yeah, I mean, that's the answer is no. They Western Central Africans. Now, when it comes to faith, that's something totally different. The markers, again, these markers exist before these faiths and beliefs. So African Americans are descendants of Western Central Africans that were already settled and established. They was already that. You get what I'm saying?
So on the whole, you would say no, but it's not impossible in history to find a Jew who would have had
some
E1,
Jews
B1A,
that
and
had it, right? That some Jews had it, but
that
the
makes sense.
idea that right, but the idea that, like, let's say in the case of African Americans as a population, that the ones that have E1, B1A are somehow all the descendants of like Jacob and like
No,
that's not.
African Americans are descendants of Western Central Africans. Some of them are descendants of Bantu speakers. Some of them are descendants of Mandinka. Some of them even descendants of Fulani. They are descendants of people that was already established thousands and thousands of years before certain populations even exist in certain portions of the Middle East. We have to also mention that a lot of their predecessors had ties in trade markets. For example, you find people in Central Africa and Chad trading with people in Sudan that's trading with people in Upper Egypt. And this is why you find a lot of components of certain things that come from the Middle East that's in Africa. A lot of your ancestors wasn't just sitting around waiting in mud huts for certain people from somewhere else to bring advancement. No, these people, like, for example, the Mandinka and the Berber and the Amazigh had trades between salt and gold in between the Sahel for thousands of years. Fulani has always been a middleman, stretching from Dakhla Oasis all the way to Senegal. So you'll find certain things like, we understand that chicken was eaten in Israel at first, but then they also imported that shit in Egypt, and Egypt had a market. And from Egypt, the Egyptians traded with populations in North Sudan. North Sudan
You said chicken. You just said chicken. You know what they're gonna do. You know black people love chicken. You know that pseudo argument.
No. What I'm saying is, if you look up the origin of chicken itself, the fowl, it goes all the way back to India or China. But what I'm saying is, when it first started to be domesticated and eaten, you see them doing it in ancient Canaan or Israel. Then you start to see it being imported in Egypt. Then you start to see people in Egypt trade with people in Sudan. Then you see people in Sudan trade with people in Chad. Chad is a middleman between what? Niger, Cameroon, and different areas. So what I'm saying is that these people, and even you find certain toolage, because people in West Africa was not stupid. You find some shit from Western Central Africa that's being imported from Central and West going east, because this was a market. This was a trade. So if we look up certain things of what's going on with these markets, people are just not sitting around. You get what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is Western Central Africans was already established. We wasn't waiting for people from the Middle East to come in. We already had networks with people from the so-called Middle East, from ancient trade routes that happened in North Africa thousands and thousands of years ago. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, I agree with that.
Right.
I got you.
Right. So do you think the case is that when you do have certain folk over here, so you know you have certain schools of thought, right? In Cozy, you have some people that will say African Americans are native to the Americas, right? They'll say that they're the original Native Americans, and that they never came over, from Western Central Africa, or they'll say things like we're the original, we're the real Israelites, or whatever the case is, or we're the real XYZ. Would you say that African Americans predominantly are in fact the descendants of people that lived in Western Central Africa before there was before there was even an Israel, before any of this stuff, and that they should probably stop doing that? They should have respect for their ancestors, from coming from these places, and not think about these places as somehow being inferior, where they need to go ahead and try to grab hold of other cultures and attempt to appropriate them.
I think Western Central Africa,
Yeah. I'm
going to say, no, I'm sorry for cutting your wisdom, and I get what you're saying. I think I go through this on Clubhouse. I think blacks, or so-called blacks, or Western African Americans, or Creole Americans, Creole Black Americans, or Middle Passage Americans, whatever you want to call them, should embrace Western Central Africa. There's nothing to be ashamed about. But I also understand that the Jewish faith do have an African element to it, primarily North Africa. And it has a Near Eastern element to it. It's a zigzag situation when it comes to the Middle East. My whole thing is that when people in the Middle East deny their African presence, that's the problem. Or for even an African American to deny his Western Central African presence. So bottom line is that we should embrace Africa. We should respect Africa. We should respect Western Central Africa. And again, that stuff in the Middle East, based off certain markers that exist in the Middle East, People can't deny African presence that was there. See, my argument is African presence was there in the Middle East. Africans controlled ports in the Middle East. We understand that Canaan was controlled by Egypt for thousands and thousands of years before you had even if the people wasn't African, these Egyptians was controlling Canaan in certain areas. And even not just that, the Egyptians was mixed up in certain layers of history, yet and still they had a blueprint that discovered that was homegrown, that developed independently in Africa. So what I'm saying is that it's important for us to recognize our ancestors from West and Central Africa and stop denying them when it comes to that. I don't have a problem with people having a faith. You could be a Muslim, you know, you could be a Christian, you could be whatever you want to be, but to deny your, or even a Hebrew, whatever, but to deny your West and Central African presence or your West and Central African ancestor as if we were nothing, that's a problem. You don't have to do that because you were great. We are great people. We are very great people, and we played a role to most of human events. When it comes to building North America, and we know North America was established in 1776, it was the hands of West and Central Africans that was building this with those Europeans and even some natives. We don't want to denounce the struggle and the situation, the ties, and certain situations that was going on with the indigenous. That was harsh. But we also don't want to denounce what was going on with Africans that played a role in the early Middle East and even in the Arab slave trade. A lot of Africans played a role in a lot of the establishments in the late Arab slave trade, and even before that, the Aksumite Empire and the Year of the Elephant. If anybody studied the Quran, it talks about the Year of the Elephant. These Abyssinian men was controlling Yemen. You know, we also got to talk about the Natufians that descend from the Cambrian cultures that come from North Africa. So I think that Africa should not be shunned. It should not be rejected. It should not be denounced. It shouldn't at all.
That's respect, man. I definitely dig that, man. Man, I really appreciate you, man, for sharing your insight into a lot of this stuff. And and like you had even said this, we had talked about this off air and everything else. You have a wealth of understanding and knowledge in this stuff because obviously you studied it. But even at the end of the day, like all of the things that we're proposing, all of these things, many of these things are hypotheticals and in certain instances, right? So it's always good to just, like science, right? Science is testable, right? What might be the science of today may not be the science of 50 years, right? Things
Absolutely.
can change, new discoveries are found. And so people should have an open mind. They should consider things, but they also should probably not try to create models, where they have, like, for example, having be, the son of another person and giving rise to this other haplogroup, which is supposed to, predate it, but then post dates it. I would say that we should all be careful, all of us, myself included, all of us. We should all be open-minded, but at the same time, we should be respectful and careful and attempt to dialogue. And even if we disagree, we can agree to disagree cordially, respectfully. We don't have to engage in unpleasantries. We can do it in a respectful fashion. Again,
I think scientifically, and I deal with a null hypothesis. I deny myself and reject myself before I say anything, because everything I said could be changed tomorrow. And I don't have a problem with that. I feel that if a person knows everything, they shouldn't even be alive. Because who wants to be around a person that knows it all? For real. Like, you know how excited I get when I learn new things? It shows that I'm still alive and my brain still has space to learn. It has room to absorb new things. If I knew everything, I'd be a miserable person. That means I know everything that's gonna happen tomorrow. I know what you're gonna say next. I know what the next person gonna say, and that's detrimental. I might as well commit suicide because it makes life boring. It makes life depressing to know everything. So I believe that I don't know anything. This stuff can change scientifically, and that's why I say that it's hypothetical. This is my idea, and I try to stick to the blueprint of what science has to offer. And even amongst that, if another idea comes out that can be tested better, that can be thrown out. That's the thing about science. You can't put a landlock on it. You can't put certain models in a headlock and say, this is what it is. For example, right now we believe, based off what we have, based off the human genome, based off the fossils that's been found, we believe that Homo sapiens developed in Africa. But things can change. Things can change 5 years from now. Human beings probably did develop near the Arabian or Persian Gulf somewhere. It can change. This is why we have to understand how science works. So as a null hypothesis, I'm going to even reject my own self and test the data myself before I come up with a conclusion and say this is what it is. And I have to base my analogies or my analysis based off the scientific consensus that's out there. So even amongst what we said, it's all hypothetical. So there should even be no room to hate. And I feel that if somebody got something to offer new, it's cool. I think that Brother Yashub is an intelligent brother because he does read the scientific literature. I believe that a lot of people in the community is intelligent because it shows that they read the scientific literature, you know. But we cannot hold on to this stuff like it's 100% because again, it's all hypothetical, or it's all it's all postulation when it comes to it at the end of the day.
Well, I might be a Hebrew because you're making me want to get some chicken, bro.
Nah, look at him.
Lemon pepper mild sauce, no coleslaw.
Oh man.
Yeah, man. But listen, I'm gonna wind this one down, man. I really appreciate you for coming on through and Cozy and for sharing your wealth of knowledge, man. I think as the old saying says, each one teach one, man. I really appreciate you for coming through and sharing that. And
thanks, cuz.
Oh yes, sir.
Yeah, man. And I do want to say this too, and just for the record, just to be on record about this, because I know that certain things were being when I had the discussion with this gentleman, appeals were being made to yourself, and I think I don't recall if I also did or didn't, but I think at the end of the day, and Cozy is knowledgeable, he's a wealth of knowledge, but even he'll admit that he's just a man.
Yes.
He's fallible, and
yes.
At the end of the day, none of us should just be making one singular person. It's not like Nkosi is like the Pope of DNA, that he's the end all be all, because he himself will say that, right? He'll say
Absolutely.
that he has an extreme wealth of knowledge, but at the end of the day, he's just one person in this big pool of conversation that we're having, this big pool of communication, and none of us should just be grabbing one person and saying this person said it, end of discussion.
Oh
discussion
yeah,
over, right? Of course not. That's not how this works, right?
I don't even want to be that guy. I don't even want to be that guy, bro, because I could be completely wrong. Again, science doesn't work like that, and any real scientist, he know not to play that game and say, I am the scientist, I know everything. Hell no. Science don't work like that. I am a small dot surrounded by nothing but cosmic radiation, bro. I'm nothing. I'm irrelevant. I'm only going to offer what I know and understand. That's all I can offer. I'm only going to present scientific methodology based off the research. I can only test the data based off even when you're in school and you go through the concentrations, you can only follow what's told, take the test, follow the model in order for you to get what you're going to get. So what I'm saying is that I am not the all end all be all. 20 years from now and 30 years from now, the next generation going to be way better than me. And I can be completely wrong about a lot of stuff, but it's about effort. It's about effort. It's about reading the literature. That's what it's really about. It's about getting involved with this stuff. In order to evolve properly, you have to be involved. And as you get involved, it gives you at least a scientific understanding. And anybody with a scientific understanding won't play that role like they the end all be all, because it don't work like that with science at all. I'm a bag of cells with an expiration date just like you are. So I'm limited.
I like how you put that. But man, I appreciate you, man. And something, if I could share this comment right here with this person, and as a Christian, this resonates with me, as they said right here, as Christians, our identity in Christ is the most important thing, right? It's the brother had put up what was it, Galatians 3, I just had it and then I lost it. It was around here where it says there's neither Jew nor Greek, bond nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ. So, as a Christian, that's the center of our faith. That's what we as Christians should be, for those of us who are Christians, that's what we should be placing our faith in, centering our faith in. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Yashub claims to believe in Christ. So I would say the same thing to him, that he should keep that in mind, that if he truly believes in Jesus Christ, if he claims to be a follower of Christ, that he remember that, Galatians 3:27 through 29, if I'm not mistaken, is very clear that, the idea, and also to avoid endless genealogies, that if we're really about Christ, then It shouldn't be about who descends from who or who comes from this or that. Your faith should be in Jesus. If that's what, if you're a Christian, that's what you should be centering your faith in. Your identity should be in him.
Absolutely. And that's what, and that's the, and that's what Yahshua taught. He said, before Abraham, I am. So for people that follow, Yeshua, Jesus, they should understand that it's bigger than a lineage. I mean, according to him, the Jews were the most corrupt people. They were the, I mean, if you even follow the literature, these people were the most hard-headed to the Most High. So what I'm saying is that when you get Yahshua, when he comes in, he kind of revolutionized that and go against that, even going against them. Even when I talked about it earlier, when the Canaanite woman was denied and he called her a dog, that was only in place to test her faith. It's bigger than that when you follow the Most High. So, to get caught up in lineage and DNA or anything is a form of idolatry, even though, your lineage is your lineage. But no one's favored ultimately when it comes to our species. You get what I'm saying? Because we see the people that was the most chosen to the Most High was the one that was most rejectful to him. It was the one that was most rejectful to him. So this is why people got to humble themselves and know their place. You feel me? Because again, when you start becoming that, it's a form of idolatry. To get caught up in, in sales and stuff or whatever, it's cool. I love it. I do like it. I mean, I like it. I think that people got a right to explain the link because we're all trying to figure this stuff out. But what I'm saying is that to believe in the Most High, it's bigger than the idea of what we call race. We are not an insecure people, or we are now, but I'm saying we don't come from a people that was weak. We don't come from a people that was nothing. We come from a powerful people. So we don't have to play the insecure role when it comes to who we are as Africans, like other people who had low self-esteem, creating this narrative or this idolatry or this thing called this idolatry in a form of racism that was created in the late 1700s, creating these taxonomies called Negroid, Mongoloid, and Caucasoid and all that bullshit. That stuff is outdated and it's out the window, and it comes from a place of insecurity.
Wait, chill. Right. Wait, we gotta keep it PG-13, man.
I'm glad you caught me. I'm sorry, but yeah.
Yeah. So about that six-piece wing, that I'm sending to your house.
I'm gonna rotate, guys. I got love for you, brothers, man. I'm gonna rotate, brother. I think How Music was gonna call in. I hope he called in to break down some stuff. I'm gonna give you guys a call back later. I have to rotate, man. But
tell the family I said what's up.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you, brother. Peace and love to you. I'm gonna call you, cuz. I'm gonna call you guys after
peace
this.
and love. Thank you so much for coming on through. We appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Peace, King. Peace.
All right. Man, I appreciate you, 93, for coming on through, man, for having your cuz on, man. I really salute you for that, man. Thank you for getting that to happen. So this way, we could get a little more clarity on the whole DNA thing and to show that, at the end of the day, man, as I'm going to say one more time, as a Christian, our perspective has to be much different. And so that's why I ultimately place my faith and trust in Christ and not in the idea of this idea of having to discover what one's ethnicity is. But man, stick around, man. Stick around. I'm gonna put you in the back, man. You already know. I appreciate coming on through and helping me out, man. Salute to you, man. And by the way, y'all check out the videos on the channel, man. 93 has contributed an immense amount of great independent research. This guy's one of the best independent researchers that I know, man. Definitely salute to you, man. You were one of the big stars in that back and forth. I'm just gonna say that way with certain people. All right, but yeah, man, I'm gonna put you in the back, man. Yo, peace and love, man. All right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna say this right now. I really wish I could find the comment. Brother Bill, if you could type it again, I'd love for you to type it again just so I could have it on the screen, man. Galatians, just so I could have it showing on the screen if you could. Really appreciate that, man. Definitely want to give a shout out to everybody in the chat who came on through and showed love. And thank you so much to AC for the super chat. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. There we go. And at the end of the day, as my brother in Christ has on the screen, this is what it's ultimately about for us as Christians. this is the foundation of our faith. Endless genealogies, those things. As Titus 3:9, 1 Timothy chapter 1 verses 3 through 5, Philippians chapter 3 verses 1 through 9, all bear witness to. The author and the finisher of our faith, Jesus Christ, the quintessential Israelite, who is not just merely just a mere Israelite, but was also God in human flesh, God the Son. To the glory of God the Father, by the power of God the Holy Spirit. We give thanks to our Lord and Savior for, giving his life so that we would have life. And I just want to say that at the end of the day, if a person claims to believe in the Bible, their foundation must be Christ Jesus, point blank, period. And so I certainly want to definitely want to let people know that must be the focal point. If we truly claim to believe in the Bible, that must be our focal point, not the idea of who we descend from, what tribal group we descend from. What matters is who we have placed saving faith in. That's what matters. But with that being said, I want to thank everyone who showed love. Shout out to the guests. With that being said, God bless you all. I hope this has edified someone out there. And until next time, take care. God bless.